Good evening, members, and good evening to the members of the public here this evening. And I'd also like to welcome anyone watching on YouTube. Item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Abbott, who is being substituted by Councillor Thorogood, Councillor Mrs Wilson, who is being substituted by Councillor Hensman, and Councillor Wrench, who is being substituted by Councillor Cunningham. We have two members not here yet, but I assume they are running late. I know there are a few traffic problems along Broad Road this evening. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda, having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Before I start, I think I will do a joint declaration that the majority of us know Councillor Lager, and I think we all know Councillor Mrs Kilmartin, who is a fellow councillor. Councillor Lager was a councillor here, so I think the majority of people do know him. Any other additional? Councillor Cunningham.
Madam Chair, forgive me, it's a while since I've been with you, but I was just wondering, I think I would like to declare a non-pecuniary interest as a member of Essex County Council, whether this is entirely necessary or not, but as they are obviously a statutory consultee regarding highways matters, and they're referenced in various reports this evening.
Okay, thank you. Who else did I see? I'm sorry, I'm going round in circles here. Councillor Monday.
Good evening, Chair. I'd like to declare an NPI in item 5D, which is application 2103699HH. The agent is known to me in a working capacity, but I'll stay and vote.
Thank you. Anyone else? Have I missed anyone? No. That brings us on to item 3, the minutes. The minutes of the 3rd of May, I'm afraid, are not available this evening. They'll be brought to the next meeting. Item 4, public question time. We have no general questions this evening. Those that wish to make a statement or ask a question do so prior to each application. That brings us on to item 5, planning applications. The first application is application 5A, application 210059 VAR, Morrison's Supermarket, Braintree Road, Witham. Can be found on pages 6 to 49. Before I go on, I'll just ask Councillor Swear, do you have any interest to declare?
Thank you, Madam. Not known at the moment, I don't believe so. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have two speakers on this application, and the first person wishing to make a statement is Councillor Michael Lager, who is attending on behalf of Witham Town Council, Nism Chapter. Would you like to make your statement, Councillor Lager? I think you know that you have 3 minutes.
Right, have I pressed the right button? Right.
Yes.
Thank you. Use your Manio, come on. Madam Chairman, this application seeks to remove the requirement for vehicular use following the removal of a section of wall between Morrison's and Cutthroat Lane in Witham. The wording of condition 11 as recommended in the committee report differs significantly from what the applicant seeks, as it omits the prohibition on trading until the wall is removed and the related works are completed. No explanation for this is given in the committee report. The effect is to allow Morrison's to get away with trading from their store extension in breach of a condition imposed by the appeal inspector in 2014, and which this committee in August 2020 saw fit to confirm. Even worse, the recommended condition gives Morrison's immunity for a further 3 years. If the committee is minded to approve the application, the committee needs to be amended to reflect what the applicant has applied for, rather than letting them off the hook. This application, seeking the removal of just 2 words from a condition, was validated in January 2021, and here we are nearly 18 months later, still undecided. And surely this is evidence that the planning system is broken and failing to deliver both for developers and for residents. The whole point of the condition is to improve road safety for all users and to lessen congestion in the area, given the anticipated rise in traffic from the Morrison's extension. It also aids the delivery of a local road scheme designed to simplify access to the railway station, and this is given specific mention in the draft local plan, which is likely to see adoption in the near future as policy. The applicant suggests that the condition is not deliverable as drafted. He has to make unreal assumptions about traffic using Cutthroat Lane without providing surveys as evidence, and for instance there are diagrams showing how a large car could turn from Morrison's into Cutthroat Lane, when this manoeuvre just doesn't take place, and this is because the left turn leads to a locked level crossing gate and no vehicles of any size are seen to turn left. The Highways Authority County Council made a site visit but didn't consult local residents or road users, and instead they've relied on standard line-of-sight criteria to support a cut-down approach in opposition to the conditions' original intent. We do accept that the COVID pandemic may not see a full return to former travel patterns, but here again the applicant hasn't submitted any evidence of people's intentions, and we have nothing better to go on than current and earlier usages. The road layout remains unchanged, and the safety and congestion risks therefore also remain. The proposed amendments to the Section 106 agreement largely reflect what was signed up to in 2014. The town centre is to see £130,000 of support, and there is an ARC contribution of £21,000. It is to be hoped that if these have yet to be paid over, then the payments will shortly be made, and that the Town Council will be invited to join with the District Council in deciding what they are to be spent on. I conclude by pointing out the weight of evidence and consideration underlying the original condition wording, along with the substantial reasons behind it, and ask the committee to reject this application.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Thank you very much indeed. The next person wishing to make a statement is going to be making a statement remotely, and he is Mr. Stuart Wilkins. He is the agent.
Mr. Wilkins is online.
Good evening, Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity. Good evening, Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. My name is Stuart Wilkins, and I'm a director at Brian G. Hall Transport Consultants. My team and I act on behalf of Morrisons and have represented them in relation to the proposed highway works at their store in Witham. As set out in the compelling officers' report to committee, we have liaised with your officers and those of Essex County Council as local highway authority to formulate and agree the scheme presented to you this evening. All aspects of the proposals are fully supported by your officers, along with the officers of the Highway Authority at Essex County Council. On behalf of Morrisons, as applicants, I respectfully commend to you the recommendation for the grant of planning permission and would ask you to confirm your support for the scheme. Thank you again for the opportunity to address you this evening, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilkins. That brings us to the end of people wishing to make a statement on this application. Before I ask Neil to make the presentation, I'll just check with Councillor Beavis if she has any interest to declare.
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll now go to Neil for the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, members. So this application is an application to vary Condition 11, which was formed part of an application which was approved in 2020, which in turn was a variation condition. So it's, as you can see from the committee report, it's quite a long planning history. Basically, this all stems from an appeal decision whereby, after the council refused permission, planning inspector granted planning permission for an extension to the store at Witham. The condition is imposed a restriction on trading from the extension until specified highway works were carried out. This application seeks to vary that condition, which I'll explain as we go through. So this is the Morrison store site, which people will be familiar with. This is obviously the main road coming through Witham. So this is the roundabout here, which is the entrance to the store. The area of wall and of highway works is down here by Cutthroat Lane. So this little red box here on the edge. So just in terms of bearings, this is the entrance in, and then if you're coming into the store, you'd carry on round this way, past the petrol station, or petrol filling station, and then into the car park here. The store's over here with the store extension that's being built. This building here on the corner next to the petrol station or petrol filling station is a three-storey block of flats. But as I said, we're interested pretty much solely on this stretch of wall here and the immediate sort of highway environs. This is Cutthroat Lane running along the edge of the application site. This is the mainline railway just running over the edge of the drawing over here. So the Witham station's just a little bit to the south here. and this is the main line. This is the branch line which runs round to Braintree, so a single railway track. As you can see, that carries across Cutthroat Lane, so there is a level crossing there, which, as Councillor Lager said at question time, is gated, so there's no vehicular access across, but you can have pedestrians and cyclists, and indeed it is a fairly well-used crossing. So just a wider context, as you can see here, Cutthroat Lane carries on up to Motts Lane, and then there is a cycle path which is going to be continued, which I'll come back to later, which is going to continue up to the northeast of Witham. This is the station down here, but yeah, we consider this to be Cutthroat Lane to be quite an important corridor for transport, particularly sustainable transport. So some photos to start off with. So this is a photo taken from the roundabout by Crichel Court. So as you come in off the main road, you approach this roundabout, and you've got a sort of stub arm at the moment here next to the flats. This is the Maltings building over here. This is the wall that's in question here. You can see there's already footways that have been constructed along both sides of the carriageway here. And just a little bit closer, so you can see this is the wall here. It's actually got a wooden fence, parts of a wooden fence in front of it, which close off any possible vehicular access. There is a 2 metre wide opening in the wall just on this side here where the footway is, so you can walk and you can get a cycle through at the moment. There's a couple of staggered barriers that have been put in as a safety measure to stop cyclists sort of flying out into people walking predominantly or cycling along Cutthroat Lane, but potentially vehicles as well, because there is quite restricted visibility at that opening at the moment. So this is a photo from the other side of the wall. So this is stood in the gates or the entrance to the commuter car park, which is access to Cutthroat Lane. So this is the back of the wall. This is the opening here, and then obviously the flats at Crichel Court. And a couple of photos just showing Cutthroat Lane. So as you can see, quite narrow. The survey drawings supplied with the application show approximately 3.7 metres in width just on this side, coming down towards Albert Road. On this side, we're down to about 2.5 metres in terms of width. So no footways or segregation, potentially two-way traffic, particularly as traffic comes into the entrance to the car park, which is just here. But you can see we're potentially opening up onto what is a fairly restricted highway arrangement at the moment. And this is just the other photograph I took. So this is looking up Cutthroat Lane, going towards the level crossing. And this was a photo that was taken today. Probably should have taken another photo to show the rest of the car park. You can see there certainly are some cars in there, but it's pretty sparsely populated at the moment, as was the main station car park when I drove past that as well. So just in terms of context, so this is Albert Road, so this is the actual junction if you're going to come down onto Cutthroat Lane. So this is looking just up from there. So traffic would come down from here, and either continue down Cutthroat Lane to the commuter car park, or could continue around in a loop from Braintree Road to Albert Road. This is towards the station. And then this is a drawing showing what the applicant was proposing with the application originally. So what they were proposing was demolition of the wall, as was required by the condition. Also providing improved pedestrian and cycle connections to Cutthroat Lane. So again, that was to be provided as part of the works that they were proposing to undertake. But they weren't proposing to provide vehicular access, which is one of the things that the condition did require. So what they were showing on the drawing here is actually a curb would be installed along here with some form of railings as well to prevent vehicular access. The reason that this was the proposal that Morrison's brought forward with this application was that there was a discussion on site with highways officers prior to the application being submitted, and both the transport consultant for Morrison's and the highway officers were concerned that if vehicular traffic was to be permitted onto Cutthroat Lane with the current arrangement, that would potentially be unsafe given the restricted visibility that vehicles would have of people walking and cycling along Cutthroat Lane, and indeed the restricted visibility that people walking and cycling along Cutthroat Lane would have along of traffic potentially coming through to access the commuter car park. So this was the sort of the germ that led to the application being made to vary the condition. What we tried to do, given the objections that were raised with the application originally, was ask the applicant to demonstrate in a bit more detail what the issues were which led to this approach being advocated. So they've provided a drawing which you will have had an opportunity to see, which shows some of the issues that would be formed if the opening were widened, the wall were taken down and vehicular traffic was allowed through. What you would be doing in effect would be creating a vehicular access with traffic potentially moving in all four directions. So a complicated junction with restricted visibility. Even allowing for relatively low speeds at the junction, the visibility that's required, that could be achieved because of the wall that will remain to the flats and beyond, would restrict visibility severely to the sides. So that's why, whilst we're satisfied and the highway officers are satisfied that safe pedestrian and cycle access can be provided onto Cutthroat Lane, that's one of the reasons that vehicular access is not proposed. So there's also some drawings which were provided by the applicant to show tracking of a vehicle at the junction. So you can see, or it's possible to see on the drawings, that it would be very tight at the junction given the available carriageway widths for manoeuvres to be made. And whilst it's true that there could be signage to restrict movements, the fact is that if you're opening up the junction or creating a junction with vehicular access, there is a risk that people will not follow the instructions or will come down here without actually realising where they're going or not want to go into the car park and will potentially turn off. And as I say, the other real risk that we're concerned about is about conflict with pedestrians and cyclists using Cutthroat Lane. So there is a policy context to this. So this wasn't simply something which sort of spun out of the Morrison's appeal with the planning inspector looking at this on a whim. There is, in the adopted local plan, 2005 plan, a road improvement scheme. So you can see here, this is the critical flats, this is the roundabout, so the wall's just here. This red dotted line coming across the commuter car park is shown to be a potential road improvement scheme with the idea that the unnamed road coming off the Crystal Court roundabout could continue through to Albert Road, and that would actually reduce some of the vehicular traffic which currently comes down Braintree Road and then loops around the sort of one-way system there to get to the station. So that was one of the reasons I believe that this scheme was advocated, to try and improve the environmental conditions for the residents along these roads. That proposed designation, or sorry, that designation I should say, is proposed to be carried forward to the Part 2 local plan, so it's kept in. There haven't been objections to it, so it remains in. But there isn't, having checked, there isn't evidence or modelling or anything of that order which actually supports the potential benefits from the road scheme. So whilst it's in there as an aspiration for the council, we unfortunately don't have a firm evidence base to evidence what the potential impacts, positive or otherwise, would be on the local road network. So what we're very mindful of, as I mentioned quite a few times already, is the importance we feel of Cutthroat Lane as a sustainable travel corridor. So whilst it is open to vehicular traffic, and indeed there will be continuing to have traffic coming along to the commuter car park as it is at the moment, the remainder of Cutthroat Lane and then going up towards Motts Lane is lightly trafficked, very occasional traffic from perhaps the allotments and the odd house. But having walked and cycled along there many times myself, I'm yet to have encountered a vehicle during the day, certainly outside of peak hours. So it is a quite attractive walking and cycling corridor, relatively safe for cycling because you don't have that potential conflict with vehicles. Quite pleasant in terms of, although this area is quite constrained with the wall and palisade fencing, further up it's more open and quite green and quite pleasant, attractive route. The slide on the right is just trying to show that it does form part of a wider sort of cycle corridor, walking and cycling corridor. So this is the North East Witham development, which is almost completed, being built by Bellway. As part of that scheme, the cycle path will be provided across open space coming down to Motts Lane here, where there's a bridleway bridge over the railway line, which provides a connection, pedestrian and cycle connection to Eastways, but also allows a connection on down towards the station. So we actually see this being quite an important walking and cycling route within the town, providing connections to the station, potentially employment on towards the town centre as well. So if we're looking at encouraging walking and cycling, we think it's important that this sort of corridor is protected so far as is possible to encourage people to walk and cycle where possible. So what we're looking to do is as I said, vary the conditions. So the condition would remain, well, would be as set out in the committee report. So the wall would be demolished, the pedestrian and cycle connection would be formed. What we're proposing is, because there's some additional works that we want to see, and there's a bit of a process to go through that in terms of gaining approval for it and making sure that the road is also stopped up once it's opened, which I'll come back to in a minute. What we're thinking is it's going to be difficult to cover that by a condition. So what we're actually proposing to do is vary the Section 106 agreement, which is already in place, but vary the first schedule, which was concerned with cycling anyway. So we're making that a highway works condition, which is proposed to be, so that what we're saying in effect will be there'll be highway works specified within the 106, which would be between the Crittall Court roundabout down to the Wall and Cutthroat Lane. There will be works which would involve the removal of the wall to create that pedestrian and cycle usage straight away through to Cutthroat Lane, but then also the works will also allow future use by vehicles through to Cutthroat Lane when and if a safe through route can be achieved. So what the proposal would be is that the works are carried out so a vehicle could drive through technically on day one, but what we would be doing is before the works are completed and before the road is opened, we would be making sure that a suitable barrier or means of preventing vehicles from driving through would be put in place. But that barrier, bollards, whatever they may be, could be removed at a future date if that scheme comes forward, whether it be the redevelopment of the car park or whether the car park operator can come up with a scheme and provide evidence to show that a connection should be formed through to the car park alone. But that would be something that would be done later. And I think, as we've said in the report, it's important to note that that was always what the inspector considered was going to be the case. It was never the intention that Morrison's would be providing a connection straight away through to Cutthroat Lane. The inspector acknowledged that there would need to be work by the Highway Authority and by others to actually form that vehicular connection in the future. So all we're looking to do with the 106 heads of terms is make it clear what Morrison's need to do, and we think that is consistent with what the inspector was expecting them to do with the condition originally. So in summary, all we're asking you to do tonight, members, is to look just at the variation of the condition. We're obviously not considering the rest of the application. The extension has been built, so that boat has sailed anyway, but we're focused just on the condition. The issue really for us as officers, and the reason the application has taken some time to come forward, is how we deal with this issue of vehicular access. So we're wanting to make sure we don't scupper or prevent a scheme coming forward in the future, which is promoted by the local plan, the emerging local plan, but we don't want to do something now which is unsafe, and that's the problem. That the Highway Authority and officers consider that safe access can't be provided for vehicles onto Cutthroat Lane currently within the land that's available as highway and that is controlled by the applicant. So we think the condition 11 should be amended. The reference to vehicles should be removed from the condition, but the other elements of the condition remain. We obviously need to rephrase the term, the time in which the condition should be carried out. Originally, the condition, as Councillor Lager pointed out, was that the work should be carried out before the extension of the store could be traded from. The store has been trading for some time, so that condition doesn't work. We don't think it's expedient in terms of enforcement action which is what it would take to require Morrison's to close off part of their store whilst this highway works matter is resolved. So we've suggested a period of up to 3 years for the works to be done. We think it could be done quicker than that, but there is a legal process to be gone through with the Highway Authority in terms of highway works and also dedication of the land. In fairness to Morrison's, that will be something which they will be part of, but they won't be solely in control of. So we've tried to be reasonable in terms of allowing sufficient time for them and the Highway Authority to work through that process. So the 106 will make it clear, as I said several times, the pedestrian and cycle access will be provided as the wall comes down, so that will be provided by Morrison's as part of their work. and that will be an improvement on the current arrangement because it will be a more inviting and more open and safer opening and connection onto Cutthroat Lane. And the 106 would also require further highway works to allow vehicular traffic to enter Cutthroat Lane in the future, but the physical barriers will be installed to prevent vehicular access immediately following demolition of the wall, and they'll remain there until such time as it's agreed they can be removed by the Highway Authority. So officers recommend the application to vary the condition with the 106 for approval. We believe that this doesn't undermine the intentions of the original condition. We think there's still the ability to connect to the car park in the future if that is considered appropriate and can be evidenced to be safe, and it also doesn't prejudice the coming forward of the route to Albert Road if the commuter car park were to be redeveloped or that scheme was to be promoted by another party. So that's probably a longer presentation than I would usually have given just on demolition of a wall, but there's a little bit of history, so hopefully that's been helpful. But obviously if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. That was very detailed and very interesting. Thank you. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm minded to support officer's recommendation, given the fact that it also has the support of county highways, and there is achievable improvements to the safety, such as visibility of cyclists and pedestrians. But I wonder about the 3 years. If these benefits are genuine, then we want them obviously as quickly as possible. And is there any way that we can encourage Morrisons to come sort of forward with the demolition works sooner than the 3 years?
Yes, please.
Sorry. Yes, we did think quite a lot about the time for complying with the condition. It certainly could be a shorter period. Like I say, I think we're conscious that legal agreements involving highways are very complicated, technical and quite involved, as Matt Bradley from the Highway Authority would echo, I'm sure. So we could reduce it. I don't think it's not 3 years that's been suggested by Morrisons, and I don't think that there's any reason to believe they don't want to do the works. They've appointed the consultant to do this work. They've tried to support us, providing additional information during the application, so I've got no reason to believe if we had a shorter period they wouldn't work with the Highway Authority to try and do that. It was just we didn't particularly want to create a situation where we suggested too short a period and then we were either being challenged to consider enforcement action in the future, or we were having to report the application back to committee another time to say we need another period of time.
Might we suggest then an informative to say, to Morrisons, you've got the 3 years, but we really would prefer you to advance it in a short time period, if at all humanly possible.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, we could reduce it to 2 years, and that more than likely would be enough. But like I say, we're just conscious that we don't want to be creating future applications if we can avoid it. But if members were concerned and felt that that was appropriate in terms of pushing it forward, we could certainly amend the condition to 2 years as an example, if that was maybe found favour with members.
Councillor Mrs Parker.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that detailed presentation. I find this quite a complicated application for such a small section of wall. I do have a concern about the visibility of vehicles if they were to use that junction, particularly well, left or right, because of the wall. And my understanding is the only section of wall that is to be demolished is literally the width of the road. Having said that, I actually know that's a car park I park in when I take the train to London, so I tend to go from Whittam. And I read actually Councillor Hicks's email today, and he completely outline exactly what I think. I think the main purpose of that spur, I think, was to provide access to that commuter car park. I appreciate it's pretty empty now, but 3 years ago, I was to try and park in there and struggled to find a space. I think when you come out of that, so to access the car park now, you have to go down Albert Road, which is a residential road. So I do feel terribly sorry for all the people who live there, with all the cars driving past, going into the car park, coming out of the car park. I think that section of Albert Road is a one-way street. You have to go left. You then have to drive past the station, back down another residential road, which is a one-way street, and then access that roundabout. I've now discovered that route, which is obviously much better than trying to get onto the main road and turning right. So I completely appreciate why there are concerns in Witham about that this particular access to that commuter car park is causing congestion. So for me, I just think it's a shame we can't create an access to that car park. I mean, I'm sure the car park operator couldn't care less which way the cars go in and out of the car park. It's not their problem. But it is a problem for Witham and congestion with Witham. So I just think it's a shame that there is not that opportunity to create a much, much better access to that car park. You come out of the car park, straight onto that Morrison's roundabout, and straight out on the main road out through Witham. Appreciate there is a big, having said that, I think there's a big problem with the safety and the visibility for cyclists. So that would need to be resolved. I mean, I personally would knock down more of the wall and create a better visibility and create a much better access. But I mean, can I just? I mean, I suppose that as it is at the moment, with the wall as it is, that's probably just it's going to create too much of a dangerous situation. But I do think going forward, one does really need to look at accessing that car park to in and out straight onto that roundabout. You could completely close the whole of Cutthroat Lane to traffic, so you wouldn't. So really, it would just be a question of trying to make drivers, some kind of means of making them slow down to make sure there are no cyclists or pedestrians, particularly cyclists. But I just think the issue for me is the car park and the commuter car park, and I've noticed it is actually in the original decision. The removal of the wall would facilitate an alternative access to the car park from the roundabout, which is the reason why I think it was put in the first place. I'd just like to have your comments on that, please.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things we did point out in the committee report was that the Highway Authority were never of the view that the scheme was necessary to make the store extension acceptable in highway terms. So the inspector did, but the Highway Authority didn't. And I think part of that is that there's never been any modelling done which evidences what the benefit would be. So I get absolutely what you're saying, Councillor Parker, that if you're coming into Witham from sort of the north and you come to the Morrison's roundabout, if you could get into Cutthroat Lane car park or get into the car park through Cutthroat Lane, that saves you driving along the main road further and then accessing as it is through the residential streets at the moment. I think the flip of that is if you're coming from the other end of Witham, then potentially you're dragging people up to the Morrison's roundabout, whereas at the moment they're turning off earlier. So there's there's a benefit and a negative in terms of the network, and it's, like I say, it's never been modelled to show what impact that would have on the capacity and the flows through the main road, which is congested. So one of the things that we would suggest or would think is likely is if the scheme was going to come forward in the future by somebody to promote it, then that's one of the things that would need to be investigated to look at what the actual benefit would be. Because I think at the moment, I can see the benefit potentially for some people like yourself, but it would be sort of an anecdotal assessment of the situation rather than an actual measuring of where do the users of the Cutthroat Lane car park come from. Would they benefit from that, or would they actually stay on the main road a bit longer and add to congestion, and how the roundabout would operate? So there certainly are benefits, but again, I think there's still, if that were to come forward in the future, then I think there's still the issue of it being a sustainable travel corridor. But actually, you've already got the level crossing over the railway a little bit further up, which obviously you need to cross carefully as a pedestrian or a cyclist. If you then have a road coming through to the car park, which is a benefit for the car park users, you're potentially stopping cyclists again or requiring them to dismount or do something because the traffic's coming through. And as you've said, there would be restricted visibility because of the wall. So there's certainly a benefit to potentially the highway network and car park users, but there would be a disadvantage in terms of how attractive it is as a walking and a cycling route, which is something we're all trying to support. So it's perhaps an argument for another day if we're looking at a scheme to connect through to the car park. But I think that's the sort of backdrop to how we're looking at it, and that's why we're we're comfortable as officers, and the Highway Authority are comfortable at the moment that we safeguard the position to allow vehicular access in the future, but just secure the pedestrian and cycle connectivity improvements now. I hope that helps. Sorry, that was quite long.
Yeah, Councillor Mann, I'll let you
I
come
can
back.
come
now.
back. I mean, that indeed is an argument for another day. It's not on offer here tonight, and therefore shouldn't directly, I think, influence our deliberations on the application that's on the table. But I would like to propose a sort of reduction to 2 years rather than 3 years, and see if that finds favour with members.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hensman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Coincidentally, 2 weeks ago, I actually visited this site, and I'm going to be an advocate for the wall now, because it looked quite ornate, and it appears to be kind of a heritage asset from the point of view, probably from the previous Criddle site as it was, because even when you go further down towards the level crossing, the new part that was constructed as part of the then Safeway store has actually continued with the theme. But if my research is correct, the wall belongs to the Highways Authority from the point of the definitive map shows, because on the planning application for the flats, their red line is inside the wall. As I was trying to work out who it was that I'd need to get hold of to say there's a problem here and try and fix it. Neil's photographs thankfully show that the debris has been cleared up, but further down it actually has Harris fencing, temporary fencing there, where it's deteriorated. And my concern is where the wall, should they just take that little section away to allow the access, the rest of the wall is actually in a poor state of repair, because when you're facing back to the car park, to the left, there are metal like bars and straps that are holding it up. You see them on old houses where you see the big circle and the bar goes through to hold the walls together. So my concern would be whatever work is done to it, you can see there that the wall fell down by itself, and the buddleia trees that are getting between the wooden fence and the wall are pushing it out such that it will just fall down and injure somebody. And it was a concerned resident that actually got me to walk down there, and he showed me. So the question is, if this work is to be done to the wall to demolish that section, could there be something that says the rest of the wall needs to be repaired such that it's in a safe state? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, Neil.
Yeah, so a couple of things to come back on there. So the wall isn't part of the highway, it isn't owned by the Highway Authority. I think it's, if you look at the highway map, it would appear that it is, but I think that's simply because of the width of the wall. It's very difficult to show on a highway map. So the public highway stops before the wall and then picks up on the other side on Cutthroat Lane. So the wall doesn't actually sit over highway. So, and that's one of the things that we're keen to secure through the 106, that as part of the highway works, that the land which isn't currently highway is dedicated as highway, because that would mean that in the future, if a scheme were to come forward, then that dedication is already there and it can be used as highway. Unfortunately, there's nothing that we can do as a result of this application to require the rest of the wall to be improved. This is a condition which is just to demolish a section of wall by the store, and is owned by the store. We can't compel them, and there's no planning reason to compel them to to do something to the rest of the wall as a result of this demolition. So I'm afraid we can't do that.
Councillor Mann, can I come back to you? I'm sorry, you did make a formal...
Yes, that we reduce the sort of time allowed to do 2 years rather than 3.
Right.
But that would need to be seconded
Yes.
and find...
Madam Chairman.
You're happy to second it, are you, Councillor? Yes, thank you. Does anyone else wish to make any other comments at this stage? Well, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this variation, reducing the time limit from 3 years to 2 years. All those in favour of that wording? No. Those against? Abstentions? One abstention. Thank you, members. That has been agreed. Sorry. That has been agreed with the change of the time frame. Thank you very much. And Matthew, thank you for coming. And you obviously haven't been put to any questions. And I know that you have no interest in any other applications this evening. So please depart if you so wish. This now brings us on to application 5B, which is application 21-03101 full, land north of Oak Road, Halstead. This can be found on pages 50 to 135, and I do have one speaker on this application, and that is Miss Jennifer Carroll, who is the applicant. Thank you. I know you've been before, you know it's 3 minutes. Yes, thank you.
Good evening, Chair and Councillors. I'm Jennifer Carroll and I'm Planning Manager from Bellway Homes, the applicant. As you may recall, members met to determine the planning proposals at the 19th of April Planning Committee. During that meeting, members debated the proposals, acknowledging the good mix of housing, the above policy affordable housing provision, a well-designed play area, and it was acknowledged that the proposed planting scheme was of high quality. As a result, members of this committee voted to grant planning permission. The proposals before you this evening have not changed since that previous committee. As officers have clearly set out in their report, the purpose of this application returning to committee is due to a technical error in their previous report. The error related to the previous outline planning permission on the site, and whilst that permission is not extant, it remains a matter of fact that the development of this site was deemed acceptable by Braintree District Council previously. In addition to this, the emerging local plan allocates this site for residential development. Officers consider that the emerging local plan warrants significant weight in the planning balance. This continues to support the principle of the development of this site. It's also important to note that this site is currently included in the Council's 5-year housing land supply calculation, contributing 70 homes to the supply. It's acknowledged by officers that the supply figure is finely balanced and currently only marginally exceeds the 5-year threshold. Should planning permission be refused this evening, the Council will need to remove the site from the trajectory, which could possibly compromise the current figure. Since the April Planning Committee, we have drafted and agreed the Section 106 agreement for this site, capturing all the planning obligations reported at the previous committee. The draft is currently awaiting signatures following the outcome of this evening. And in the interim, we're also preparing our pre-start condition detail to ensure if planning permission is granted this evening, we'll be able to start delivering homes without delay. Officers conclude that they do not consider the fact that the previous permission on the site has lapsed changes the planning balance, and importantly conclude that this does not change their recommendation to grant planning permission for the development. We therefore respectfully request that you follow the officer's advice and resolve to grant planning permission this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Carroll. I have no other speakers on this application, so we'll go to the presentation, which is going to be made by Neil. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. This application, as was explained at question time in the report, was previously reported. This is a full application, detailed application for the erection of 80 dwellings with associated public open space, SUDS landscaping, associated structure on land north of Oak Road in Halstead. what we'll do is I will go through a presentation on it, because I appreciate that some of the members who are here tonight and will be voting on this won't have attended the previous committee meeting. So I will try and go through it again relatively quickly. But obviously, if there's any questions, please ask as we go along. First of all, though, I would apologise that we've had to report this back. This was due to an oversight by myself and a colleague who were writing the report and checking it. So, hands up, it was our mistake. We erroneously reported that an extant outline permission still existed at the time, which was not the case. It certainly was the case when we started talking to Bill Way about the application. I'm afraid it was very much planted in our minds then, and we didn't check again. So, I say apologies to everybody that we're having to report this back. So the site is, as I said, north of Oak Road. So Oak Road is a sort of fairly narrow lane that runs along the south of the site. This is Tidings Hill along the side of the site. This is the existing edge of the town. Coney's Road and Grange Close being the nearest residential streets. So just in terms of context, we're at the southern end of the town of Halstead here. So Oak Road here, and then we've got development going on over here, with the Bloor and David Wilson scheme being built out. So Oak Road continues round here to Tidings Hill. So this is the site plan that's proposed. So it's 80 dwellings. We've got a full detailed application. There's, as you can see, two parcels effectively. So parcel 1, which is on this side of the site, and there's a tree belt, or a partly retained tree belt running through here. And then this is the sort of western field, or parcel 2 here. The only vehicular access to the development will be off Tidings Hill here, which will be a new access formed into the site. I have been asked to just point out, with regards to access, Councillor Pell raised this recently. There are 2 gated accesses at the moment off Oak Road. These gates were put up to close off openings by the previous landowners. That was before Bellway purchased the site. The gates remain in situ, obviously, to secure the land to make sure nobody goes on there in the interim. They won't be used for access to the development when residents are living there. They'll certainly be closed off. There will need to be a temporary use or access off Oak Road for a short period whilst the access in the main vehicular access of Tidings Hill is formed. So I was asked just to explain the situation, because I think it had been reported on some social media offerings within Halstead, and there was a concern that actually what Bellway were going to do was access their development off Oak Road. That's certainly not the intention, never was and isn't, but I'll just clarify that now. But as we go through, so these are just some site photos. So this is the Eastern Field, parcel 1. So this is looking across the site from the boundaries. So you can see largely unimproved grassland looking across. This is the western parcel, the larger field. So this is looking along the bottom, this photo here on the right. So this is the boundary of Oak Road. This is looking from the bottom, the southern end of the field, looking back up across towards the houses on Coney's Road. And there's a block of flats on Coney's Road here, which overlook the site as well. And a couple more photos. So this is again looking up towards those flats on Coney's Road. This vegetation around the corner here, this is around a residential property, Oak House, which has an outbuilding which was previously being used as a sort of spa treatment centre. So it's a residential property with a commercial use alongside it. And then just some more photos. This is looking up onto the closer at the boundary on Coney's Road, so you can see quite an open boundary in places at the moment. So this is the western site boundary here. So again, this is the building where the spa treatments and whatever were being carried out at Oak House. And then there's a conifer hedge around most of the boundary. And then this is the western boundary, western end of the site here. So members will have considered an application for land for residential development just on the other side of this previously, which was refused. So looking at the scheme in a little bit more detail, parcel 1, the entrance into the site. As you come in, there'll be an equipped play area on the right-hand side. one of the two suds attenuation basins on the left-hand side. And as you come in, this is the main road coming through. As you notice, trees lining the street on both sides. A couple of private drives coming off, forming this cluster at the front. And then coming through the old field boundary, a sort of centre point here, connecting into this site where the majority of the development is. Again, the main sort of road, such as it is, comes through to the end here where it terminates. Terminates on a rather nice view of a large TPO oak tree, which was a deliberate urban design choice, a good termination to the street. But again, you can see on the main street here, trees on both sides of the roads continuing through. And then again, we've got some drives, low order roads coming off. And again, some tree planting on these, although not on both sides. There's a policy compliance, or policy, exceeds policy compliance in terms of affordable housing. So 35% of the development will be provided as affordable housing. So that equates to 28 units. And you can see the distribution of them there. Usually for a development on the edge of a town, our policy would be, or our practice has been, to ask for 30%, minimum 30% affordable housing. When the outline permission was granted, the applicant for that application offered 40%, which was well in excess of what the council would want, but we secured through a 106. Bellway's scheme proposes 35%, which is still in excess of the minimum required by policy, and the 28 units would actually equate to the number that would have been achieved through the 40% on the outline scheme. That was for a slightly lower number of dwellings. So 28, in terms of net number of units, were the same as we would have expected originally when the outline permission was granted. So I won't dwell on these, but this is just to give a flavour of the house types that are proposed. So we range from one-bed maisonettes, but provided in sort of this sort of house-style form, so quite attractive and in keeping with the rest of the housing which is proposed. So we've got a choice of or a variety of materials to add interest to the street scene. So we've got render and bricks, sometimes mixed, as seen on this one, where you've got this sort of quining around the edges. And then we've got some houses. So this is a 3-bed market sales house, which is proposed to be clad in boarding, weather boarding. And then these are just some other examples of house types that we're looking at. It includes some bungalows. There are a couple of bungalows which are offered for market sale and a couple for affordable housing. So those are these. And then the applicants provided some street scenes to show what how the streets will be composed with the houses together, so you can get an impression of what the development would look like from these. I'll just go through these quickly. So we're also provided with some computer-generated images to show what the development is envisaged to look like. So this would be the view from the pedestrian footway coming into the site from Tidings Hill. So pedestrians would come in just in this corner here, and the footway would loop around. The vehicular access would just be down here. To minimise tree loss, we're not running a footway along the edge of Tidings Hill and then looping in here. By cutting the footway in round the back here, we're reducing the need for tree removal to get the footway in on Tidings Hill. So this is the play area, which I referred to on the block plan. And then these are some other images of other parts of the development. So this is in the western field. This is the sort of field boundary of the trees, established trees here. This is the larger suds attenuation basin, which will be set out, which you can sit and enjoy. And then this is some images of some of the houses. This is one of the sort of lower order drives which comes down the side here, looking onto the open space. And this is going into the heart of the development, so you can see the street here with street trees on both sides. See the houses with the different materials, so we've got an interesting sort of composition. And again, another one from looking down from the main street, looking down one of the lower order roads, trees down on the side, you can see there. So tree-lined streets, as we explained previously, were subject to much discussion with the applicant through the pre-app process. Officers were pushing for tree-lined streets throughout the development, and this is what we've we feel comfortable with after having negotiated. So the blue and the red areas are to indicate how it's envisaged the trees will be managed. The red ones are envisaged to be managed by the Highway Authority as part of the adoption process. The blue ones are envisaged to be managed by the management company that will be appointed by the developer. But you can see what the plan does show is the extent of tree planting as you come through the main street, and slightly less down the lower order streets, but we consider appropriate in the context, certainly given the open space around the edge, the views through to the existing sort of trees and hedges that have been retained around the edges. So there is some tree removal and some hedgerow removal which is necessary, which is set out in the report. This was always acknowledged and accepted as part of the outline permission. So just for reference, this is the tree removal plan which was provided as part of the outline application. So this was just to give an impression of what was likely, but it does make it clear that there was always going to be tree and hedge removal. And then this is what's proposed by the applicant. So you can see we've got the gap being created for the road to come through in the middle here, through that existing field boundary. Tree removal on Tidings Hill here, which we've written a fair amount in the committee report, so I won't revisit that. And then some removals around the edges of the site here. What the applicant did do is provide additional information on those removals. So you can see this is more a question of scrub and saplings, and self-seeded vegetation which is being cleared. So whilst it looks sort of quite dramatic on a plan in terms of extent of area which is being removed, the photos actually show the quality of what was being removed. And as officers, we were quite comfortable with that. There was little value that we saw in retaining that type of vegetation. If the rest of the site is being developed for residential housing, it's not going to have fantastic amenity value. In fact, it's going to cause issues as it matures. It wasn't usable in terms of open space either. So we think an appropriate balance has been struck here in terms of retaining what's important and valuable around the edges, which provides a screen and provides a setting for the development, but removing the lower quality and lower level planting around some of the edges. So the site access, as I said, will require some tree removal, which is shown on this drawing here, the red trees here. As I said, the footway will be continued along from Grange Close, along Tidings Hill, just into the application site here, and then it will loop around the back of the trees here, and then pick up with the road along here. This is the vehicular access here. So it's a 5.5 metre wide carriageway. Within, the Highway Authority is satisfied with the visibility display that can be achieved in both directions. That's appropriate with reference to prevailing speed and traffic surveys. So the site enjoys some fantastic trees already, which are being retained. There is quite extensive additional tree planting being proposed, particularly around the entrance area here, but also along through the streets. So we think the landscaping scheme is a positive element of the scheme. The play area was amended following comments which were received from the Town Council earlier in the process, and some additional equipment was included, or more equipment was included, which was more accessible for people with mobility issues or disabilities. So that we consider was a positive response to a comment that was raised by the Town Council. So in terms of a summary, as we've set out in the report, just quickly, previously we were saying as a benefit, as an adverse impact, we were saying there was the conflict with the adopted plan policies. However, we think that must be tempered against the Section 2 plan, which, as you heard, allocates the site for development. So overall, we would say the proposed allocation weighs in its favour. There is harm to trees and hedges. As I've said, there will be some that will need to be removed, but we think what is being removed is justified and reasonable, and is being mitigated to an extent by the new tree planting. In terms of benefits, obviously housing delivery, as you heard, we are to some extent relying on this already within our housing land supply. So it's very much a site that we want to see coming forward in terms of delivery. So it'll be an additional 80 dwellings, 28 of them will be secured as affordable housing. The outline permission was for 70, which obviously we were counting on already. So there's a slight additional, the additional 10 units adds to that benefit as well. We do consider the site to be accessible in terms of access to facilities and services, albeit on the edge of Howstead, but within a distance which we think is reasonable to walk. And we do think there will be economic and social benefits to the town more widely, so moderate weight assigned to that. So overall, the site has been assessed to be suitable for residential development previously. It's also proposed to be allocated in the local plan. We think the scheme layout, following a lot of work by the officers and developer, is one that we can support enthusiastically. We think the detailed scheme, or we can report that the detailed scheme received no objections from statutory consultees, and we think in terms of the planning balance, notwithstanding the fact that we don't count an extant outline planning permission within the balance now, we still think there are benefits there which far outweigh harms, and we still think the members should be passing a resolution to grant. I'm pleased to report that 106 is agreed and is in the process of being signed, so we can move quickly to issue the planning permission if members approve this tonight. And as you've heard from the developer, they're very keen to get on and start building on the site, which will assist us with our housing delivery. So I hope that's been helpful, just in terms of running through the whole scheme, but if there's anything I've skipped over or missed, then please ask and I'll try and cover that. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much indeed. Members, Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Neil, for your presentation. I'm going to keep this really short because this is exactly the same application that we had before us back in April, only a few weeks ago, which we approved. There are no changes at all. It was, an unfortunate technical error in the report. It's quite right that it's come back to us this evening, but there are no other changes, and personally I see no reason to change my view on recommending officers' approval, which I'm happy to do. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Does it find a seconder? It does. Councillor Mann, do you wish to speak?
Happy to second, and will support for the same reasons, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? No, well, we have had this application before us before, so I can understand there's no new issues. It has been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray, seconded by Councillor Mann, that we grant this application. All those in favour? Those against? Abstentions? That has been granted with one person against. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Neil, for your presentation. Now brings us on to the application 5C. Application 21036184 Gershwin Park, land north east of Reed Road, Witham. And I do have a speaker on this application. We found on pages 136 to 190. And the first person wishing to make comment on this is Councillor Mrs. Angela Kilmartin, who's speaking on behalf of Witham Town Council.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Evening, members. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Planning Committee in Witham Town Council, and I'm representing its interests, and we're very keen to see supported growth in the town in the right places and for the right uses. Here tonight, I'm here in support of the development and to recommend to this committee that it overturns the recommendation and approves the application. The applicant team presented proposals to the town county planning twice, which are for mixed use, residential, retail and a care home, and we all really liked it. We spent 2 hours looking at it very carefully. There are huge benefits to Witham and the surrounding villages. There's the provision of affordable family homes, a 70-bed care home, nursing home with a dementia unit probably with it, and neighbourhood shops which are badly needed. Proposals have support locally. Perseus spent time consulting via a dedicated website page local residents prior to lodging an application with Braintree. The majority of those responding were in support of the proposals, and only one letter has been lodged to the formal application against it. Witham Town has 30,000 inhabitants and growing, with only 6 residential care units housing some 250 people at the moment, and only one elderly nursing facility, St George's in Avenue Road, which takes just about double figures. Many more are in need of nursing care in the town, or will be soon, and at the moment, Broomfields is used instead, and bed blocking is a regular occurrence, stopping proper treatments. Witham badly needs this new nursing facility, which could include dementia for the community, and to relieve the hospital of non-emergency cover. Barchester, who will operate the care home, specialise particularly in developing nursing homes, and Witham would be in good hands. Family homes with strong provision of affordable houses are part of this. The local community have been asking for the neighbourhood shops for years. The applicant is keen to get started and deliver in the short term. Witham Town Council is of the view that the proposals do represent good design, where it reflects the character and appearance of Maltings Lane area. Sustainable building methods will be adopted. The development will have plenty of trees, air source heat pumps, triple glazing and solar panels, and the applicant has acknowledged that sustainable building principles will be adopted all over, which is very welcome. The applicants have shown they're very willing to work with the Town and District Council to deliver the proposals on the site, which is one of the final sections of the Malting Lane development, up for 20 years to be done. We understand that District Council planning officers accept the principle of the development, but seem to have found some points solely related to design. 2 sentences, Madam Chairman?
2 sentences only.
And that's no problem. The applicant has offered to amend the proposals to address those, and they're clearly willing to provide the right scheme in the right place for Witham. The whole Town Council welcomes his proposal, which will be of huge benefit. So please vote for the applicant. Witham Town Council's proposals, therefore, are to overturn the recommendation and vote in favour of the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mrs. Gilmartin. The next person wishing to make a statement is Mr. Julian Burgess. He is speaking on behalf of the applicant.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Barchester Healthcare. Barchester, we have over 260 care homes throughout the UK. We employ over 18,000 staff, and we care for over 14,000 residents. Since July in 2015, we've successfully achieved 41 new planning consents, and will now provide an extra 2,500 new care beds. We have 17 care homes on site being built at the moment, and over 23 new homes opened in the last 4 years. And we have 24 homes in planning at the moment. We are absolutely committed to a delivery of a care home on this site and have identified a need in Witham for it. We will be providing dementia care within the home, and the need for specialist homes is acknowledged by officers. Planning policy currently relies on windfall sites. Our assessment to using industry recognised and CQC approved software and data collection shows a current shortfall of 263 care bed spaces with ensuite wet rooms within a 3-mile radius of the site. And this is equivalent to 4 new care homes. The category of accommodation represents the a modern qualitative benchmark, and is also endorsed by the same CQC. Care home is proposed in an outline application for a mixed-use development by Countryside Properties at Wood End Farm. I know Countryside very well and have spoken to them, and my understanding is that this delivery isn't actually planned. The current stock of care homes comprises mainly first-generation care homes, built in the 1980s and 1990s, and registration design standards were much lower, and 50% of these were classified by the CQC as requiring improvement in their latest inspection reports. We feel that Witham's elderly deserve much better, and the best way to increase consumer choice and raise standards across the board is granting permission for the development of modern purpose-built care homes. The care home, it does occupy a fantastic position in the wider scheme. Opposite the Pottery Kiln Public House, It's ideal because it's busy. Residents like activity. They don't want to sit looking out at a field with a tree in it. They want to see activity, and certainly in my experience, this is a great benefit. In conclusion, we'd ask you to approve this and let's provide much needed care in such a location. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Excuse me. The final person wishing to make a statement on this application is Mr. William Chambers. He's speaking for the agent. Thank you, Mr. Chambers.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Councillors. Before I speak, can I just remind you you've got the...
yes, and we've had it by email as well, so
okay.
I think we've all seen it. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm speaking today as applicant Perseus, seeking the committee to vote in favour for this well-considered scheme. We are ready, willing and able to deliver this important site for Whittam. The recommendation for refusal from your officers is on 4 grounds. 3 of these would ordinarily be dealt with via Section 106, and I can confirm we are happy to enter into the same. We agreed to pay contributions for education, libraries, recreation and the NHS, and this has never been in doubt. We can also confirm we are affordable housing policy compliant, and we will meet the Affordable Housing Officer's specific requirements as requested, and we draw your attention to the letter of support from the local RSL. This leaves solely design matters as a reason for refusal, which are of course subjective. Scheme delivers high quality and well-designed sustainable homes, together with retail units and the much-needed care home within landscape grounds. There are no outstanding technical matters and no statutory objections aside of design, and we are willing to accept the proposed conditions. The only harm that can be identified by your officers is to the character and appearance of the area, and that I question the committee is what is the character and appearance of this area. As many of you will be familiar, and the site is surrounded by a variety of uses with varied character, from modern estate housing up to 3 stories plus pitched roofs, alongside the modern Aldi, which is white rendered flat roof structure similar to the nursery and school. Comparatively, there is also the red brick Persimmon offices, and all of these units are within generous parking arrangements. Contrary to officers' views, the quantum of development at 39 dwellings per hectare is reflective of the site's location and appropriateness for a site within the town centre boundary. It's in keeping and comparable to the wider Maltings Lane development, just like the Taylor Wimpey and the Red Rose schemes. The parking arrangements are also comparable and in accordance with policy and Essex Design Guide. Our proposals are actually lower in height than the 3-storey apartment blocks in the wider development, and I would also add the separation from the care home to apartments is 26 metres, so there are no concerns about overlooking. We've incorporated sustainable design throughout, from orientation and layout, as well as including air source heat pumps, photovoltaics on the roof, electric charging points, and we're also planting 120 new trees. Your officers consider that there is harm caused by the proposals. I would urge the committee to look at the CGIs, the master plan and the landscape proposals presented and consider, is this poor design or is this actually a difference of opinion of architectural style? It's up to members to weigh up and perceive the perceived harm against the planning benefits of the proposal. The benefits include 44 new homes, a policy-compliant affordable housing delivery, 70 care home beds of the 263 shortfall, construction jobs, investment in the area, alongside 70 full-time employment jobs, and not forgetting the Section 106 contributions amounting to almost £500,000. All benefits are contained in our briefing note. Can I read my last piece?
We've all received it anyhow, so we have read it ourselves.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of statements on this application. I'll go to the presentation, which is going to be made by Janine. Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. This application seeks full planning permission for a mixed-use development, including 44 dwellings, apartments, 70-bed care home and single-storey building for 3 retail units with associated vehicle access, parking and landscaping. The site has been previously designated for development following the outline planning permission and approved master plan on land adjacent to south side of Maltings Lane, whereby there is already an extant planning permission to provide a mixed-use development. The site is located within the town boundary of Whittam, and as such, the principle of redeveloping the site for a mixed use of residential and commercial premises is acceptable. Vehicle access to the residential dwellings and apartments will be via an existing access, which is located here from Owers Road, adjacent to the primary school. Oh, sorry. The care home and retail units will be accessed from the southwest of the site and from Reed Road. The car parking dominates the overall layout of this mixed-use development with limited soft landscaping. In relation to the site plan for the retail units and the care home, the site plan shows the retail units dominated by hard standing and car parking to the frontage. It also acts like an island with the care home parking to the rear of the site. The retail units are considered to be bland and dominated by hard standing car parking. The retail units have little interest to the facades, and not all elevations will benefit from active frontages. For example, the side and rear elevations, which are highly visible from the footpath to the north and west of the units, has little interest. Overall, the retail units appear odd and poorly proportioned when compared to the 3-storey care home proposed and the mass of the Aldi store. In relation to the care home elevations, the care home has been designed in a U-shaped form with 3 storeys. The overall siting of the building lacks separation from the street frontage, and the front elevation overlooks the blank facades of the retail units to the west. Overall, the proposal fails to provide a suitable active frontage to the main road, which fails to provide legibility and visual interest. The forward siting of the development is considered to be out of character with the surrounding area, whereby development is set back behind landscape frontages, and its impact due to its scale, with limited setback, is unduly imposing, and the little separation dominates the amenity. With respect to the apartments, the design is also considered to be poor quality. The scale fails to relate to prevailing character and would appear large and dominating with little setback again from the street frontage. The U-shaped building has resulted in the entrance having poor legibility with no prominence within the street. The elevations fail to break up the overall massing of the development through detailed design. The balconies poorly integrate to the building and appear to be an add-on. The central amenity space is enveloped by 3 sides of the building, and the overall layout is continued to be dominated by hard standing. In terms of the dwellings, there are various types of dwellings. As discussed earlier, the layout again is dominated by hard standing, and some of the parking areas have poor end stops to the streets and vistas, and parking is divorced from some of the housing it serves. The elevation signs are quite weak and poor and lack articulation. The dormers fail to align with the windows to the lower levels, steep roof slopes, and dwelling type AC would result in a gable end above the existing ridge to this property, creating an awkward form and appearing higher than the other dwellings. It is considered the dwellings create an incongruous form of development in the street scene, which is not acceptable and a direct result of an overly compact form of development. In relation to the quantum of development, officers are concerned for future residents by reason of limited separation distance between the care home and flats for overlooking and interlooking, and in addition, a number of the houses proposed would have limited distances to the boundaries below the Essex Design Guide. Amenity space does meet the requirements, however there are concerns in relation to the position of the flats, whereby they would be adjacent to future commercial development that has not come forward, and that quality of amenity space could be compromised. Concerns have also been raised in relation to the proposed landscaping, which is not considered sufficient in line with the MPPF. No objections are raised in relation to highways based on parking and tricks information in relation to the impact on highway network or safety. No objections are also raised in relation to the ecology, heritage and impact on residential amenity, lighting or contamination. In respect of the Section 106 agreement, 13 affordable homes would be required as part of this application. The applicant has indicated a 60% affordable rent, 40% shared ownership. However, the Council's Housing Enable Officer has stated that the Council's usual requirement is 70-30 in terms of the mix, and the tenure mix is not acceptable, proposing flats only, whereby the need for Whittam is for 3-bed dwellings as opposed to the flats provided. Other obligations include open space, healthcare provision, education, which have not been secured through the legal agreement, together with the RAMS payment. In terms of the photos, obviously this is the site from the south part of the area. This is the junction whereby the residential properties would be accessed. This is the eastern boundary with the residential properties this side and the primary school to the south here. They're the residential properties existing to the north. This is the site from Jory Road, whereby the apartments and the care home would be located. These are existing commercial premises to the south of the site. The view looking onto the nursery and the oldie and the public house, and the site looking north. In terms of the planning balance, to summarise, the adverse impacts are the harm to the character and appearance of the area, impact on residential amenity and a lack of Section 106 agreement, the delivery of affordable housing, ecology and RAMS payment. Officers are aware the applicant has contacted members of committee prior to this meeting with supporting information in respect of this application. Officers would like to advise we have had extensive pre-application discussions prior to the submission of this application, whereby we have always raised fundamental design concerns with the proposal. We have also had a meeting during the course of this application, whereby we did have an active discussion in terms of the design concerns, and whilst we have tried to work with the applicant discussing these issues, the proposed changes in this instance required so fundamental we would advise to have a new planning application which would then be required at a later date. The applicant has confirmed that they are willing to make all of the Section 106 payments, and a letter has been received from CHP suggesting now all of the homes would be affordable. This has now been presented to officers, but not during the course of the application, and we have no formal information to assess this element. The applicant has also now confirmed that they are willing to discuss the housing mix, although the housing officer has confirmed that at this time the proposed tenure that they are proposing is not deliverable in accordance with our policy, whereby we require 3-bedroom properties and the tenure mix. Officers consider this does not change the fundamental reasons and the application is recommended for refusal. In relation to the benefits, there would be delivery of market and affordable housing, economic and social benefits during the course of construction period and following the occupation of the development, supporting local facilities. The site is in a sustainable location and the provision of neighbourhood shops. Overall, to conclude, the proposal would harm the character and appearance of the area and impact on residential amenity, lack of planning obligations and the delivery of affordable housing to meet the needs of the requirements of the area. Considering the planning balance, the benefits of the proposal are outweighed by the harms, including harms arising from the conflict with the development plan, and as such, officers believe this application should be refused.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you very much. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Janine for that presentation. I think this is an interesting application, and Councillor Mrs Carmartin in her comments sort of underlined a sense of frustration with how long Maltings Lane development has taken to build out, a couple of decades. And regrettably, I think if we were looking at examples of a major strategic site and the frailties and the failures of a planning system, I think regrettably we would point to Maltings Lane. Sadly, failure of a national policy framework that provided a framework for developers not to deliver on promises. You have the situation where you had roads to nowhere for too long and a complete failure and delay for that social transport and community infrastructure to come on stream with the houses. And I think, regrettably, everything in the last 5-10 years has almost been a retrospective attempt to try and elevate the standards of a major strategic site in a very important key town in our district. And because of that, I think the expectation level for any forthcoming developments is rightly high. And whilst there are some plausible aspects of this application, some welcome aspects of this application, particularly the care provision, I think the officer has articulated very clearly that this falls beyond this authority's and this planning department's standards in terms of design, and it also isn't compliant with our affordable housing policy. Therefore, I think the officer also reflected in her presentation that there's a very clear stare to the applicant of what is required, and I think we note with interest that the applicant has responded to that, albeit not through the formal planning process as yet. Therefore, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to move recommendation for refusal of this planning application, I think with the advice that the applicant reflects on what may well be said in this debate, should that decision be agreed by the Planning Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Does it find a seconder before I move on? Thank you, Councillor. Mrs. Spray, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm happy to endorse the comments made by my colleague, Councillor Cunningham. I think it's a shame that the applicant did engage in pre-app discussions with officers, but it's a shame that their concerns were not sufficiently taken on board. And I think that's a pity, because there is much to like about what we have before us. I have absolutely no doubt that the care home is needed, and shops and housing, but the mix isn't right here and the design isn't good. And I noted a comment made by Mr. Chambers that the design is subjective. Well, yes, it is, but you know, this committee has a reputation and has had for a while now for asking high quality design on developments, regardless of whether it's for 10 homes or 100 or 500. And this one does not meet that standard, I'm afraid. So it would be wrong, in my view, to accept this, because, you know, a care home is much needed and the area does need developing, but at the cost of poor design and poor layout. I also understand that the developer has, throughout the later application process, sort of communicated with officers and tried to address various points, but that really should have been done early on. For me, it's too late in the day once a report is, you know, half drawn up and then ready to come to committee. So, yes, I think it's a pity. I mean, I look forward perhaps to something more acceptable coming forward to us, but on this occasion, I'm happy to support the recommendation for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Mrs. Spray. Anyone else? Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chair. I'd support the remarks of both previous speakers. I mean, this is a very significant application, and it will eventually be of considerable benefit to future and existing residents of this area of Whittam. But I can't see that it conforms at the moment to the approved sort of master plan. I think trying to do too much in the space available, and there needs to be a better and more acceptable balance between the various elements of the application. I'm sure they'll all be there in some form in the end process, but I think at the moment it needs more work, and the only way that it can be satisfactorily done is through a new application.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Belker.
Yes, thank you. I would agree with the comments of my colleagues, Madam Chairman. I mean, I think, you know, all the elements are there. There are a lot of very pleasing things. The care home is going to be very welcome, as are retail units. I am concerned about the comments from the officer about the affordable housing and whether, in fact, indeed a block of flats is appropriate. The comments about tenure, we must get this right. There are also, I agree, I think there are some design issues. I'm sure it is going to be possible to resolve these issues, and I'm sure it's going to be possible, it will be possible to bring an acceptable scheme forward. But for me, I think there are some improvements that could be made, and as a result of further discussion. So I do support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I really applaud the fact that the applicants have come forward actually taking so much of the sustainability in their design. I think it's a welcome that at last, developers are coming forward with so much sustainability, taking in not only the orientation but the EV charging and renewable energy as well. So I welcome all of that. With regards to the design, I think actually some of the design is quite good. And I think it's quite modern, and I think I take the account of what has been said about their care homes, which I support, and also I think you're going to need the three-storey effect there in order to get that level of care in that site as well. So I think there are quite a lot to like about this scheme overall. But I do think I am concerned about the affordability mix on that. But I do hope that should another application come forward, if this is indeed refused tonight, is that we don't end up with, that we do actually see a really quite an exciting development with good quality, because I think some of the quality as such, it is subjective. And it is true that surrounding it is a different amount of design. So I hope that there will be an opportunity maybe for good design to come forward that's actually modern as well. But overall, I think there's a lot to like about this, but I'm just concerned, as colleagues have mentioned, about the affordability mix in it.
Okay. No one else? But it has been moved and seconded that we refuse this application. It was moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Mrs. Spray. All those in favour of refusal? That is unanimous. Thank you, members. Thank you. We now come to the last application on the agenda this evening. That's 5D, application 21-03699HH, Brambles, White Ash Green, Halstead. This can be found on pages 191 to 205. It's going to be presented, I believe, by Janine. Janine, thank you.
Thank you. Planning permission is sought to construct a detached two-storey cart lodge together with a ground floor side extension to the existing dwelling. The site is located within the countryside, outside of defined development boundaries. The principle of development is acceptable as the provision of the cart lodge can count towards parking in accordance with policy, and extensions to houses are acceptable subject to all planning policies being satisfied. In terms of the elevations, the design and appearance of the cart lodge is considered subordinate to and compatible with the character of the residential plot, the main dwelling house and a wider countryside location. The detailed design includes a two-storey form with roof lights to the front elevation and a rear dormer, staircase and balcony to the rear. During the course of the application, officers have negotiated with the applicant to amend the siting of the cart lodge, as previously it was attached to the dwelling. In addition, there is a proposed porch to the front of the property. This element is considered, by reason of its limited depth, gable roof design, height and materials, compatible with the residential property and wider landscape. The photos show the existing dwelling in terms of the front elevation, whereby the location of the porch will be, and this together with various views around the property. Again, this is the principal elevation. This is already an existing single-storey building attached. Existing parking arrangements and the view from the countryside land. The cart lodge structure allows a sufficient provision of parking, and additional parking is available elsewhere on the plot. The proposal will have no impact on residential amenity owing to the detached nature of the plot and distance from the proposed development and neighbouring boundaries. The principal design and scale of the development, together with the highways and impact on residential amenity, is considered acceptable. Therefore, we are recommended to grant planning permission.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you. Councillor Mann.
Appears to be entirely within policy. Chairman, move officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Let's find a second. Councillor Ritchie, yes, okay. Did you wish to speak?
Nothing further to add. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Anyone else wish to add anything further? Well, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application. It's been moved by Councillor Mann, seconded by Councillor Ritchie. All those in favour? Thank you very much, members. Thank you. That brings us to the end of planning applications. We now come to item 6, members' forum proposals consultation. This can be found on pages 206 onwards. And Chris is going to introduce this and deal with the subsequent questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sorry, I was just struggling sharing my screen there. Good evening, members. Very pleased to present the proposals for the Planning Committee Members' Forum. As members will recall, we changed the scheme of delegation back at the end of 2020, and as part of those proposals, members at full council approved the principle of a members' forum, but there were various additional work that needed to be undertaken to set out the governance arrangements and the detail of the proposals. So the paper before you this evening is that sets out those proposals in more details. It also includes the draft terms of reference as well. The report that's before you obviously sets out the timetable and the other consultation that we have done and are seeking to do. I'm obviously very keen to hear members' feedback, suggestions, comments in relation to the proposals this evening. I just thought it'd probably be helpful just to reiterate a couple of the principles around the proposal first, and then in terms of the consultation that we've done, we presented to the Developing Democracy Group on Friday and also to the Governance and Audit Scrutiny Committee yesterday. So I've just got a summary of some of the themes and comments that have been raised at those two meetings, which I just wanted to share with members this evening. But in terms of the proposal, so in terms of some of the principles here, the aim is to facilitate a new forum which would enable applicants and developers to come along and present their proposals at the pre-application, pre-submission and post-submission stage prior to the determination of that application at Planning Committee. Now, as part of those proposals, it's obviously proposed that the membership would extend to all Planning Committee members and substitute members, but also extended invitations to the relevant ward members and also to the relevant town or parish council, should that be applicable. And the idea here is really one about engagement at an earlier stage. At the present time, applications come before this Planning Committee for determination. Members at the present time do not see the proposal and how that develops over time, the discussions that take place with officers, and this proposal, the forum, would enable that engagement at an earlier stage. A key principle here, which is important to stress, is that this is not a decision-making forum. The decision-making would remain at Planning Committee, and the forum would simply, in terms of those that attend, would only be able to ask questions and clarifications of applicants and developers. But through that, it's felt that members would gain that understanding of the proposal. And as I said, particularly for some of the larger scale applications that we now deal with, there's an opportunity that through the planning process, members would be able to gain an understanding of how those proposals evolve and develop over time, whilst critically also involving, as I said, elected ward members as well as the town or parish council as part of those meetings. So in terms of the time frame, as I said, I won't go into any detail because obviously the paper sets out the detail of the proposals. But in terms of the time frame, as I mentioned, we've already presented to the Developing Democracy Group and the Governance and Audit Scrutiny Committee. Subject to members' comments, suggestions, feedback this evening, the intention is then to commence some consultation with the town and parish councils in June, and again, subject to those comments, we would then hopefully look to take a report to full council in July. Just in terms of the feedback we've had so far, so just starting off with Developing Democracy Group, I've just tried to really summarise the themes of the discussion and some of the points and issues that have been raised. So there was some good comments and some feedback from both of the committees we've been to to start with. The first was actually around the time of the consultations with the parish councils and when we were seeking to undertake this. So as I said, we didn't want to preempt effectively the responses from the three committees, but we've certainly taken on board that comment, which was just a concern really that we didn't want to miss early meetings of any parish or town councils that were meeting in early June. So we will look to start that consultation as early as we can and run it for a good time during June to enable parishes and town councils to respond to that. Obviously, a key point which came up in the original consultation was around the point around predetermination and how important it is for training to be undertaken for members beforehand. So, as members will note from the paper, very much proposed that all members would benefit from some training before we commence with any more members' forum. And as I said, in terms of the predetermination point, the key thing here is it isn't decision-making forum, and members wouldn't be able to express a view. They can express or ask questions and clarifications, and guidance around that would be provided as part of the training. There was a query around the impact of the changes to the scheme of delegation since the end of 2020, and a bit of a concern about planning committee agendas and whether or not the number of agenda items had actually reduced. So just a clarification around that, that although planning committee agendas still comprise quite a lot in terms of volume, but in terms of the actual agenda items, given the change to the scheme, there's been a reduction overall in the number of items that are reported, and that's particularly apparent in terms of the smaller scale householder applications, other applications, what we refer to as the minor applications, those applications for 1 and 2 dwellings. Some comments around the frequency of meetings and potential impacts around member allowances. Question over whether or not interest groups could participate in member forum meetings, and also whether or not we would refer to the members forum within planning committee reports. And again, the intention there was very much that we would provide some commentary within published planning committee reports if an application had been referred. And on the participation point, as I said, in terms of key principles and the aims and aspirations for this forum, it was very much geared towards getting the elected representatives from the district as part of the actual forum proposals. I think there is a point here about engagement, which is really important, both in terms of public but also interested bodies and groups. And what we're not seeking to do is to effectively replace the developers' obligations really for undertaking that consultation with the community, which very much is something obviously advocated within our statement of community involvement and something that we continue to push. But very much that this is geared towards those involved in the actual planning process that ultimately would be responding to consultations and ultimately members as part of this planning committee making a decision on that application. There was a comment around how we would seek to ensure that participation is taken up from developers, and that was both for speculative but also allocated proposals. And as members will note on that, we are seeking alongside these proposals to revise our pre-application charging and proposals, and the idea is that we would want to embed these proposals really as part of that new scheme, so that applicants and developers couldn't cherry pick if they want engagement with the authority, which is something that we'd want to encourage. We wouldn't want them to be able to simply come and have that discussion with officers. We'd want that engagement with both officers and in terms of the forum as well, so it would come as a package. There was some good points around how we deal with cross-boundary applications, which, as members will be well aware, we do receive those. And absolutely the intention would be we'd want to invite the relevant ward members if there was cross-boundary, and also if there were 2 or more parish or town councils that could be impacted again, we'd want to extend those invitations. And a really good point around NSEC proposals, just in terms of the practicality, given the geographical scale of some of those, as to how potentially we could incorporate those within a members' forum discussion. And then yesterday we had a meeting of the Governance and Audit Scrutiny Committee, And again, some good points and discussions. So this is just a very brief summary again. But again, clear acknowledgement, not a decision-making forum. The same point around how we would look to try to secure participation from applicants and developers. A real acknowledgement again around the importance of training, and also then linked with that how we would seek to provide briefings for town and parish councils or ward members who would be planning to attend a forum meeting, and the point again about the predetermination concern, I suppose, in terms of members at the forum, in terms of how you would interact. It would be very different to your role here at Planning Committee, and again it's that training that would be provided in terms of how members would ask those points of clarification and questions from applicants and developers to ensure that you are not leaving yourselves open and expressing a view. So again, clear acknowledgement of the issues, but I think both committees, really good discussions, some good feedback and suggestions coming out of both of those. As I said, I'm more than happy to answer any questions from members this evening, but very much look forward to hearing comments and suggestions and feedback from this evening. So, Madam Chairman, happy to open it up to the committee. Thank you.
Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think as we've evolved through thinking about bringing this forum together, I think there's been some really good and open discussions. I think one of the points that that still kind of sticks in my mind a bit, and I know it's kind of picked up under 3.24, is around the training piece. I think the training around this is going to be really, really key. And the reason why I mentioned the training is because to make the separation between our responsibilities on the planning committee versus a members forum for speculative for upcoming plans, it's going to be a fairly kind of big thing to kind of differentiate against, and entering into a forum with that kind of open mind thinking, not just from a planning perspective, but also from a political perspective as well. I think we just need to really push ourselves and challenge ourselves to make sure that we are entering it with the right spirit. My only kind of future concern, so to speak, would be how this forum might work against us should a speculative planning proposal go through the forum, then go through committee to be refused by us and then tested under an appeal process, and whether or not the developer would try and use that against us, or indeed an inspector or two use that against us, and whether or not it could bite us on the backside. Just some comments on that would be appreciated. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Really good question there in relation to that engagement. I mean, my response to that, I suppose, is not dissimilar to how, as officers, we felt when the pre-application process was introduced many years ago, in terms of how we engage as part of the local planning authority with applicants and developers. At that point, well, actually, if we actually start having discussions with an applicant or developer, but does that somehow tie our hands in terms of the decision that can be made? So my response is absolutely no. But effectively, the planning committee can make whatever decision members deem fit on the night when the application is finally brought to this committee for determination. This is about engagement, and it's an opportunity to see that proposal at an earlier stage. So I think because members will not be expressing a view, and it's just part of that wider engagement piece, there may be points that get raised and get amended during the process, but fundamentally you could have a speculative scheme that goes through that process. But all the way through, it's very clear that actually there's it's a side that isn't allocated in the local plan, where there's an in-principle objection, or maybe there could be a fundamental design reason, or whatever it may be. That engagement does not necessarily override the fact that there are those fundamental concerns. That the application still has to be determined on the basis of the material planning considerations and on the basis of policy and whether or not it accords with the development plan or not. So I do see some similarity. I think it's a really good point. And as I said, I remember when the pre-application system was first introduced, and it's that point that as officers we sort of grappled with and thought, well, actually, if it's a proposal that in principle might be okay, that's much easier conversation. But actually, in relation to proposals where there may be some concerns, that's slightly harder. But that isn't something that is. I mean, it obviously gets mentioned as part of the appeal process in terms of there has been pre-application, but our responses are clear on that in terms of how that's been documented. And, obviously, in terms of MPPF and government, its pre-application engagement is something which is encouraged as part of the planning process. And as part of this, there's opportunities for points and issues potentially to be clarified, amended through the system at a much earlier stage in the process, which can only benefit the overall process. So I think it's a really good point, and again, it comes back to that training and that confidence that members would have to have in the proposals before we get going for it. If the forum came forward eventually, but hopefully that response is of some help.
Councillor Bowers.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got a few questions on this. That's a great point about the predetermination and the training and that kind of thing. Would governance be in attendance on these meetings just to police whether members are showing a lean in one way or the other? Or so if the comments are made or questions are directed in a certain area, that could be classed as predetermination. Is that going to be policed from a governance point of view? Just sort of, that's one question. A second question, am I right thinking, I know you said about the timescale, are we heading towards the next civic year for when this would be starting to be implemented? Because I notice about like the frequency we are saying is every 3 weeks, so 17 meetings of planning committee, potentially 17 meetings of members forum. So are these going to be on different evenings, so we're going to be meeting a lot more regular than we do now? And also, with these member forums, will this mean that we will have the benefit of having shorter presentations at planning committee? And one last point would be, do developers get an option? Can they refuse to go down this route, or is it, I'll say we force them, but is there a, you either do, you know, I mean, can they basically refuse to sort of present at a members forum? Thanks, Chris.
Carry on.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. So taking each of those in turn, so the forum is not intended as a formal committee of the council. So it would be supported by the planning team, effectively, who would, as I said, in terms of there'd be prior training and so forth around this point, around predetermination. The intention, the proposal would be that those meetings would be recorded, so there'd be a record of what was said and discussed, but in terms of the support, it would be coming from the planning service effectively in terms of how those meetings would run. That's the proposal, because it's not a formal committee of the council. In terms of the implementation, as I said, obviously not wanting to preempt any sort of feedback and so forth from members, and also potentially from consultation from town or parish councils. If we went on the current trajectory and we were looking to report something at full council in July, and if the proposals were supported, I think we would be keen to commence the forum later this year. So rather than waiting for the new civic year, we'd be keen to get going and to schedule that. And you're right in terms of the frequency. We would be, as part of the proposals, we'd be looking to reduce the frequency for planning committee from a 2-weekly cycle to a 3, and then similarly, the suggestion would be a 3-weekly cycle for a members forum meeting. And yeah, we'd be looking to do that on different evenings effectively. Again, sort of thinking probably a similar time, sort of Tuesdays and so forth. So, but an evening meeting for those. In terms of the presentations, obviously happy to take members' feedback on the length of presentations as always. I think the difficulty is obviously some of the applications that we now deal with, particularly some of the larger strategic sites where you're looking at design codes and master plans, we feel sometimes that we have got to provide a certain amount of of information, obviously, to members to enable you to make that decision. But I think what the forums would be really beneficial for is actually allowing members to have that oversight from an early stage in the process to actually see how a scheme has evolved and developed. And that's particularly, I think, for the larger ones. So some of our larger strategic sites, those are subject to pre-app discussions with officers, potentially for over a year. And we would see many iterations of that scheme over a period of time. And I think, the decision-making that's done by this planning committee, you receive an awful lot of information condensed within the report. You have the benefit of an officer presentation, but you haven't seen or been party to some of that engagement. So I think it's the potentially maybe not shorter presentations, but again, happy to look at that. But I think it's that familiarisation in terms of with how those proposals are moving forward through the planning system that will aid that decision-making process in terms of seeing things at an earlier stage. And then in terms of your fourth question, Councillor Bowers, in terms of attendance, so we can't compel applicants or developers to participate in the Members' Forum process. However, I think the only thing we can do, as I mentioned, is as part of the review of our pre-application advice service and the way we, our planning performance agreements that we currently offer as well, is I'm very keen that if the Members' Forum proposal was approved, that we would incorporate the Members' Forum, we would make it integral to both of those options. So if a developer or applicant wishes to engage with us at the pre-application stage, and overwhelmingly developers will want to do that before they come in with a formal application, they can't cherry pick in terms of what engagement they have. So it would ensure through that mechanism that developers would be able to attend. And the sort of the feedback, and from my past experience, I would suggest that actually a lot of applicants and developers would be keen to take the opportunity up. And as you've seen this evening, developers are very keen to put together glossy brochures with CGI images and so forth before an application is considered by the planning committee. So I think there's confidence we can be as officers that there would be that keenness from applicants and developers to participate. But I think it's key that we don't allow sort of cherry picking as part of the process, that's kind of integrated within the scheme. But hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Beavis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got just a few comments and questions, if I may, so I'm just going to gallop at a pace. First of all, I think in terms of the forums, I really do appreciate this coming forward. It is big change for this authority, but this is about transparency and engagement. And it reminds me a little bit of, when I started, many of us did many years ago, when we had the local committees and then we had regulatory. So at a local committee we could, agree or disagree to something, but then we kind of knew it was going to go to regulatory and we might all sort of, it might all change. There's a little bit of that. I wanted to pick up on the point that Councillor Bowers made about would we have smaller presentations at planning committee. I wouldn't personally favour that because I'm just very mindful of the amount of people that do make the effort to come along or watch via the YouTube, and what I wouldn't want to see is members of the public saying, oh, well, it's all been decided outside of a meeting, and then we're just getting something very cut down and short, because I think that wouldn't do us as the local authority any favours, because I think we're quite highly respected, actually, for the amount of, information we do have. Just quickly on the interest groups, I do agree it would be helpful, but I'm just thinking of somebody like the new prisons group that's established, and I think we'd really have to pick out a couple of key members and really kind of limit that. Otherwise, it's going to get a bit explosive. Pleased to see there's going to be commentary on the agenda. Interested to see how we're going to manage the unparished Braintree and Bockin. So again, some sort of prominent rep to that particular application I think would be useful. It may be in the papers, I may have missed it, but some engagement with BALC as well as town and parish councils would be useful. Working with them on the boundaries again. We often have here Housestead and Grinstead Green and Housestead Rural come along, similar applications, different parish councils, so to bring them together I think would be great.
And finally, as we've said over the last few weeks at this planning committee, the areas around Section 106, you know, trees, environment, all of that stuff, we're going to have a much better opportunity to kind of thrash our ideas out at that early stage. So do really welcome that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Did you wish to comment? I think there were many comments rather than questions.
There was just one point, maybe, if I just on that point around interest groups, because I think that's, as I said, it's something that we considered when we were looking at the proposals. And as I said, going back to first principles, it was very much that this was geared towards members of the planning committee, the elected ward members for the district, and then the town and parish councils. I think the engagement piece is really important in planning. Planning is a public process, and contrary to what might be said in the press or thought, actually as officers, we really recognise that, and we do everything we can to encourage developers to do that engagement. As I said, I think there's an important point here that we don't want to dissolve the developer's responsibility for actually undertaking that consultation with local residents, with interest groups. And I think with interest groups in particular, it's very difficult that if we opened the forum up, I think it's very difficult in terms of where you would draw the line, in terms of, is it a heritage group, is it a resident group, is it a particular interest group? It becomes, I think, quite much more difficult to manage, and then in terms of attendees and so forth, whereas I think the proposals as formed based on the elected representatives, I think there's a clear steer there. And as part of that, again, one of the objectives which set out in the paper is about then being able to hold developers to account over what actual engagement, what wider engagement have they done with the wider local community, which, again, as officers, that's something that we raise when we have that pre-application discussion. But there's huge variation, depending on which developer you're talking about, in terms of whether or not they do engage and the extent to which and the quality of that engagement. So I think it's a good point, but I think in terms of that's really where the drive of the focus was in terms of the proposal. So, again, hopefully that response is useful. Thank you, Councillor Peters.
Councillor Mrs Parker.
Just a quick question for me. I know, Chris, we talked about design training for members. It was interesting that, you know, the application this evening obviously turned a lot on design. I just wondered whether you felt it was important for us to have some training on what the sort of essential, you regard as sort of essential design principles prior to attending these members' forums, or to have it as a separate thing.
So again, Councillor Parker, I think it's a really, really good point. If members feel that would be really useful, I think just in of itself, that's something that we should look to try to organise anyway. But I think as part of the forum proposal, I think seeing those early stages of proposals, actually, it could be quite telling and quite interesting for members, because obviously as officers we see a proposal when it first comes forward, and quite often it's very different to the final scheme that's then presented to the planning committee. It's subject to an awful lot of negotiation quite often through the pre-application process, or during the application process. So I think that's potentially definitely something we can look to try to incorporate as part of the training. Initially, in terms of the type of things maybe that the approach we would take as officers and the type of things, but more general in terms of design training, that's more than happy to look at that for the committee as a whole, in any case, irrespective of the members' forum proposal. So, thank you.
Chris, I've got one question and one comment. Parish councillors, town councillors and ward members will be invited. Would they have to consider predetermination rules in the way the planning committee does, or would they have more freedoms?
So really good question. So I think in terms of all of the guidance that we would give out as part of the forum, even though the ward members would not be ultimately involved in the decision-making process on there, I think we would have to train and explain that the etiquette of the forum is around clarification and asking questions as opposed to expressing views. So that there wasn't any misrepresentation in terms of what was discussed, and similarly, the same points obviously would apply to town and parish councils potentially who haven't considered the proposal. So again, we'd look to give the same guidance to town and parish councils, and then again to try to in the same way that for members in attendance, we'd look to provide a briefing note in advance of the forum to set out what we would see as officers, sort of the key lengthy sort of fact sheet and key issues, but very much sort of 1 or 2 pages to try to aid the consideration and thought and discussion at the forum.
And the other point I wanted to make was I represent 11 parish councils, and they all have just had their May AGMs and annual meetings, and they only meet every 2 months. So they're all going to be meeting in July, not in June. This is going to cause a problem.
So note the comment, and yeah. So as
It's
I said,
not
I
just
think
me. I mean, many of the rural ones. I think Councillor Parker will agree with me. They meet every 2 months. They have to have their AGMs and their annual meetings in May. So they've now met in May. They won't be meeting till July.
so happy to take that feedback. I mean, obviously, as I said, I think the key thing in terms of the report that was taken to full council back at the end of December 2020.
Yeah.
That set out the stages that we needed to go through in terms of the committees that we needed to have some further consultation on, and I think we were very keen as officers that we didn't want to press ahead with progression until we'd actually referred to the reports, all 3 of those committees, taking on points and suggestions and feedback. So happy to reflect after the discussion this evening just in terms of that consultation and how that's undertaken.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Has the scheme been adopted by any other councils that you're aware of? And has the benefits been examined and any conclusions drawn from it, if there were any benefits?
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. So I can speak from personal experience on this because the authority that I previously worked for had something very similar, and it operated on a very similar form of terms as to what's proposed within the paper before you this evening. Other authorities across the country have variations of this as well. It's not every authority, but there are other examples at other authorities. My own personal experience from having participated and presented and been at forums where some of the applications I was responsible for were being presented was overwhelmingly positive in terms of that sort of engagement piece and in terms of members' understanding of what we were dealing with as a team in terms of what was on hand, and then in terms of, as I said, that wider engagement piece, and also the ability, for some of those issues to be raised earlier in the process and clarifications as part of the process. So nothing formal to refer to in terms of those outcomes. So I can only really speak from personal experience, but I know colleagues within the team who've come from other authorities as well have also had that similar type of experience, and I think from an officer perspective that's been positive. My recollection was that members equally found that to be a positive experience, and it was something that they actively participated in and found beneficial. So I can only reflect on my own personal experience there, Councillor Johnson, but hopefully that's helpful.
Councillor Swear.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. In paragraph 3.4, it mentions quite a bit there that I tend to agree with, but I can't imagine that we're going to get all of us here tonight in a forum without expressing views and sort of likes and dislikes. And I'm concerned about the point where we express interest and then it becomes predetermination. So I think that's one of my big concerns there. And then the other thing, as I note, that we're not making decisions. Taking that into account, will everybody have the opportunity, not just us, but also those attending, will we be able to do this via Zoom on Teams, because we'll be able to get the presentations to save travel and hopefully increase attendance as well.
So on the predetermination point, so that's a fundamental, that in terms of the operation of the forum, we and this is where the training point is absolutely key. That's something that prior to the commencement of these forums, we will need to ensure that members are comfortable and confident in the way how you would interact during that forum. And again, governance legal colleagues would be available to help with some of that training potentially, and we would be there in support, obviously, as I said, in terms of the actual forum meetings themselves. But that's an absolute fundamental, that as planning committee members, you would not be able to express a view. But there is a point here about how you ask those questions and clarifications, and again, that would have to form part of the training. And it may be that's not just one session, maybe that's several sessions that we'll need to have with members so that you've got, individually, you've got confidence in terms of how to proceed. In terms of your second point, Councillor Schweer, in terms of how we'd hold those meetings, as it is in the formal committee of the authority, we have the flexibility as to whether or not those meetings were held in person or whether or not they were held virtually, and very much open to feedback on that from members in terms of preference. There may be occasions that actually, and potentially early on, that for members to gain their confidence with this, that actually some in-person meetings might be useful. But again, there's the flexibility to do either as it is in a formal committee or a decision-making body.
Yeah, I just think the opportunity of hybrid meetings actually works very well, and I think everyone's getting used to it everywhere. So, in order to encourage that attendance and get expertise and saving people a lot of travel, it may be a useful point. And I just hope, with regards to the predetermination, I just hope that we don't end up sitting there just looking at it, listening to offers again, and not being able to contribute into the forum.
Councillor Bowers.
Yeah, you mentioned elected representatives, but I noticed there's no mention of county councillors. Would it make sense for at least the unparished areas to include the county councillors if we don't even include them over the whole district? Thank you.
So again, it's a good point, Councillor Bowers. And I think in terms of the proposal, obviously happy to reflect on that feedback and take that away. I think again, it was just trying to, in terms of the concept, keeping the membership and the attendance potentially as close as possible in terms of related to the actual district, in terms of district elected members and parishes and towns. But happy to take that point back.
For transparency, I don't know if I need to declare an interest there that my wife is a local county councillor, so for transparency I will declare that interest as well. But that's not the reason, obviously, I asked the question. I'm just thinking of because I represent a unparished area myself, so it's just whether that, and then notice that obviously the county council weren't mentioned in the original communication. Thank you.
County councillors do come and speak at planning meetings, don't they? So they might want to be involved in, but I don't know. They don't come very often, let's put it that way. Councillor Thorogood.
Say a ward member is already predetermined, would they be able to join in and ask questions, or is it only for people that have no predetermination?
That's a good question.
So again, I think that's a point we'll have to clarify. It's a good, really good point, Councillor Thorogood. I think if my initial reaction to that is if a member has already, prior to a forum meeting, declared a view on a proposal, I think again we'd need to take some advice from legal and governance on this. But my reaction to that is that it would probably be inappropriate for that member to attend that process and alongside other members in the same way that that member wouldn't participate as part of the planning committee meeting itself. But again, I think it's a good question and happy to take that back and discuss with colleagues on that.
Anyone else? Oh, Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly, I want to thank Chris for the presentation. I think this is the third presentation of this he's made within 5 days, and it's the third one I've attended. But the comments and questions we've had back, I think, have been really good and really interesting. I do think this is going to be beneficial if we go ahead with this. It does require a different mindset, because as long as I've been on planning committee one way or another here, it's always been sort of drilled into us that better not to engage with developers before an application comes to committee, and then you don't run the risk of predetermination. So it just requires a different way of thinking, and there is obviously going to be an opportunity to ask questions of a developer when they make a presentation at the forum. It's just going to be how you ask those questions, really, but that's where the training will come in. I do think we need to keep it fairly tight in terms of attendance. Obviously, members of the planning committee, ward members, elected members of town and parish councils, and yeah, obviously we've had the potential for counter councillors thrown into the mix tonight, which is certainly worth thinking about. I personally don't feel we should broaden it out much more than that. I think if you start asking interest groups to attend, where do you stop? Because you're bound to ask somebody else will feel left out. And it's also important, you know, to push the point that this is an opportunity to engage on a non-determination level with developers. It's not going to be a lobbying forum in any way, well, except obviously the developers will be lobbying, but I think it's quite important to keep the attendance down to the planning committee elected ward members and elected members of the town and parish councils, not to make it too broad. But I feel very positive about it. Very much appreciate the comments that we've had from everyone over the last few days at the various meetings. And yes, I absolutely take on board the point about the consultation period. At the moment, it's planned to finish 1st of July. If we want to get this to full council on the 25th of July, I think the final date for the agenda is the 13th of July, so we could probably go a bit beyond the 1st of July, but I'll leave it, I think, to officers to discuss that with governance and see how we feel. But I obviously wouldn't want to shortchange any of the, particularly the parish councils who don't meet quite so regularly. So I think we'd have a look at that. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Monday.
Just a quick clarification. It's not mandatory for planning committee members to attend this forum, and I'm just a little concerned listening to Councillor Spray about keeping it tight, and about, for instance, if a member of the planning committee didn't attend for whatever the reason, would they feel then left out in some way if that application then came to a full planning committee meeting? So I'm just kind of like maybe have a little bit more clarity on how you're going to get the balance if it's not mandatory for planning committee members to attend and it's voluntary, how we're actually going to make sure that that actually works, that we're all going to get the full knowledge that we need.
We can't make it mandatory because we have holidays, don't we?
Thank you, Councillor. So, again, really good question. I think obviously the intention of the proposals is this something which, from an office perspective, the perception is and the thought is that this will be beneficial for members of the planning committee to have that early engagement as part of the process and to see those schemes earlier. So I would hope, and obviously take feedback on this, that members would be supportive and would want to attend. Obviously, it's not going to be possible to attend every forum, and appreciate obviously that there are substitute members as well on the committee and so forth. So there could be variations, but ultimately the key point is the planning committee is the decision-making body, and those members that are present on the evening will still have the benefit of the same officer report, the presentation, and all the the site of the public representations and the consultation responses and any public speakers on the night. So in terms of decision-making, that process is unchanged, but obviously if we move forward with the proposals, we'll obviously be keen for members to come along and attend. So,
right. Well, thank you very much, Chris, for your presentation. Some of us have heard it more than once, and I would like to thank everyone for asking questions and taking this on board and get ready for the training. I think the training is going to be quite long. And I will close the meeting at 9:35. And thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.